They called humans the weak ones across 17 star systems. Frail bodies that broke too easily, minds that cracked under pressure, spirits that shattered when faced with real adversity. The Galactic Council had reluctantly accepted humanity into their ranks only because of their strange ability to form bonds with other species young. It was useful for diplomatic relations, they reasoned, but hardly made humans worthy warriors. Commander Zektar of the Vraxian Empire had laughed when he first saw Captain Sarah Chun step onto Kepler Station with her human squad. These soft-skinned creatures thought they could protect the mining colonies on the Outer Rim. The veteran warriors of a dozen campaigns would show them what real strength looked like. But Zektar wasn't laughing anymore, as his massive frame lay broken in the crystalline caves of Arcturus 7. Watching his own cubs cower behind fallen rocks, while enemy plasma fire scorched the air above their heads, he finally understood something that would shake the very foundations of galactic civilization. Humans weren't weak because they broke easily. They were terrifying because of what happened when they broke. And today, as Captain Chin's body grew cold beside him and her blood mixed with the alien soil, Zektar was about to witness the most frightening force in the known universe. A human who had nothing left to lose, protecting someone else's children. The real war was just beginning. Captain Sarah Chun adjusted her helmet's visor as the transport ship descended through Arcturus VII's atmosphere. The planet's surface looked like a wounded animal from orbit, scarred with mining operations that stretched across continents like infected veins. Her squad of 12 humans sat quietly in the passenger bay, checking their equipment one final time before what should have been a routine patrol mission. Approaching Kepler Station, announced the pilot, a gruff Zelanti whose 4 arms moved across the controls with practiced efficiency. Weather's looking rough down there. Dust storms coming in from the west. Sarah nodded and activated her comm unit. Listen up, people. We're here to investigate reports of unusual seismic activity in the lower mining tunnels. Standard reconnaissance, nothing fancy. Watch your oxygen levels and stick to your assigned partners. The mining station sprawled across a mesa like a mechanical spider, its legs extending deep into the planet's crust where valuable crystals grew in natural formations. The Vraxian Empire had claimed this world 3 years ago, establishing one of their most profitable operations in this sector. The work was dangerous, but the profits enormous. Quantum crystals found here powered faster-than-light communications across half the galaxy. As their boots touched the station's landing platform, Sarah immediately noticed the tension in the air. Vraxian workers moved with jerky, nervous motions. Their usual proud posture seemed diminished, and several kept glancing toward the mine entrances with what could only be described as fear. Commander Zektar approached them with his typical swagger, though Sarah caught the slight tremor in his massive hands. The Vraxian stood nearly 8 feet tall, his scaled hide marked with scars from countless battles. His people were known throughout the galaxy as fierce warriors who never showed weakness, never retreated, never asked for help from other species. Captain Chun, he rumbled, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to absolute obedience. Your arrival is timely, though I question why the Council sent humans for this task. This situation requires real strength. Sarah had dealt with Vraxian arrogance before. Their species had built an empire on the principle that might made right, and they viewed most other races as inferior. Humans, in particular, were seen as barely worthy of notice. Too small, too weak, too emotional. We're here to help, Commander, she replied evenly. What exactly are you dealing with? Zektar's golden eyes narrowed. Seismic disturbances, as reported. But they follow a known natural pattern. Something moves in the deep tunnels, something that shouldn't exist. We've lost 3 survey teams in the past week. Sarah's second-in-command, Lieutenant Marcus Webb, stepped forward. Lost how? Equipment failure? Keyfence? No. Zektar's mandibles clicked together, a sign of agitation among his people. They vanished. Completely. No bodies, no equipment, no trace except strange energy readings that make no sense. The Vraxian commander led them through the station's main corridors, past bustling control rooms where technicians monitored dozens of mining operations simultaneously. The walls hummed with the constant vibration of massive drilling equipment working far below. Sarah noticed several young Vraxian cubs peering out from doorways, their large eyes following the human soldiers with curious intensity. Your cubs seem interested in us, Sarah observed. Sektar grunted dismissively. Young ones are easily fascinated by novelties. Pay them no attention. We have more pressing concerns. But Sarah did pay attention. In her 3 years of diplomatic missions, she had learned that children often saw things adults missed. The Vraxian cubs weren't looking at the humans with simple curiosity. There was something else in their expressions, something that looked almost like hope. The group descended through multiple levels, past residential quarters and supply depots, until they reached the mine administration center. Here, the walls changed from polished metal to rough stone, and the air carried a mineral taste that made breathing feel heavy. Chief Mining Engineer Thorek spread holographic displays across a central table, showing the tunnel network that extended miles beneath their feet. Red indicators marked the locations where teams had disappeared, forming a pattern that didn't make immediate sense. The disturbances began here, Thorek explained, pointing to a section of tunnel nearly 2 miles down. Initial readings suggested minor tectonic activity, nothing unusual for a mining operation this size. But then the pattern started. Sarah studied the data streams, scrolling across multiple screens. Energy signatures unlike anything in the standard databases, gravitational anomalies that defied physics, and temperature fluctuations that suggested something massive was moving through solid rock. "Have you considered evacuating the station?" she asked. Zektar's laugh was harsh. "Vraxians do not flee from unknown threats, Captain. We face them and destroy them. That is our way. Sometimes tactical withdrawal is the better choice," suggested Sergeant Lisa Park, Sarah's demolitions expert. "Not for us." Zektar's tone brooked no argument. "This operation produces 30% of the Empire's quantum crystal supply. Abandoning it would be unthinkable. We will find whatever lurks in those tunnels and eliminate it." Sarah exchanged glances with her team. She could see the same concern in their eyes that was growing in her own mind. The Vraxian reputation for stubborn courage was well known throughout the galaxy, but so was their tendency to let pride override common sense. "We'll need a full briefing on tunnel layouts, safety protocols, and emergency procedures," Sarah said. "My team will conduct a preliminary survey of the affected areas." Unnecessary, Sektar replied. "Tomorrow at dawn, we launch a full assault on whatever hides below. Your humans can observe and learn how real warriors handle such situations." The dismissal was clear, but Sarah had dealt with worse diplomatic challenges. "Commander, with respect, rushing into unknown danger without proper reconnaissance isn't courage, it's foolishness. Let us gather intelligence first." For a moment, she thought Zektar might strike her. His battle-scarred hands clenched into fists, and his mandibles spread in a threat display that would have terrified most species. But Sarah stood her ground, meeting his four-eye glare with steady calm. "You question my judgment, human. I question rushing my people into danger without proper preparation. That's my job as their commanding officer." Something shifted in Zektar's expression. Perhaps he recognized something familiar in her protective stance. Or maybe he simply decided that arguing with humans wasn't worth his time. Either way, he nodded curtly. "Very well. You have until tomorrow evening to conduct your survey. But when the assault begins, your people will follow Vraxian commands without question." As they were escorted to guest quarters, Sarah noticed more cubs watching from corridors and alcoves. Unlike adult Vraxians, the young ones didn't try to hide their interest. Several even approached close enough to touch the humans' equipment with wondering fingers before being called away by anxious parents. "They're not afraid of us," Marcus observed quietly. "No," Sarah agreed. "But their parents are afraid of something else." That night, as her team prepared their equipment and studied the incomplete tunnel maps, Sarah found herself drawn to the station's observation deck. Through thick transparent steel windows, she could see Arcturus VII's twin moons casting silver light across the scarred landscape. The mining operation never stopped, and even now she could see automated harvesters working under artificial illumination, their mechanical arms reaching deep into the planet's wounded surface. A soft sound made her turn. One of the Vraxian cubs had somehow escaped its family's quarters and now stood in the observation deck entrance, staring at her with those huge golden eyes. The young one couldn't be more than 5 years old in human terms, still small enough to hide behind furniture, but old enough to understand danger. "You shouldn't be here alone," Sarah said gently, crouching down to the cub's eye level. To her surprise, the young Vraxian stepped closer instead of running away. When it spoke, its voice was barely above a whisper. The deep songs are angry, it said in heavily accented standard. They sing of hungry dark and broken light. The elders don't listen, but cubs hear everything. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's recycled air. What deep songs? But the cub was already backing toward the exit, apparently realizing it had said too much. Don't go below, human warrior. The hungry dark likes soft things best. And then it was gone, leaving Sarah alone with questions that multiplied like shadows in her mind. Later that night, as she tried to sleep in the cramped guest quarters, Sarah found herself thinking about children. Her own species had a saying, when the children are afraid, pay attention. Throughout human history, young ones had often sensed dangers that adults rationalized away or simply refused to acknowledge. The Vraxian cub were trying to warn them about something their parents either couldn't or wouldn't discuss. But what could frighten a species that had conquered half the galaxy through sheer determination and overwhelming force? Sarah's last thought before sleep finally claimed her was a memory of her grandfather's stories about Earth's ancient wars, when soldiers would sometimes find children hiding in rubble, eyes wide with knowledge of horrors that adults had learned to ignore. The expression in those young faces was always the same. Desperate hope that someone, anyone, would finally listen to what they were trying to say. Tomorrow, she decided she would listen very carefully indeed. The mining station's artificial dawn came too early, announced by harsh lights that gradually increased in intensity to simulate planetary sunrise. Sarah's team assembled in the equipment bay, their faces grim as they prepared for descent into the unknown. Each human wore full environmental suits equipped with enhanced sensors, emergency beacons, and enough oxygen for 6 hours of exploration. Remember, Sarah addressed her squad, we're gathering information, not looking for a fight. Stay together, document everything, and if something feels wrong, we retreat immediately. Through the bay windows, she could see Zektar assembling his own force. 20 Vraxian warriors armed with plasma weapons and powered armor that made them look like mechanical giants. Their approach to problems was simple and direct. Identify the threat, apply overwhelming force, claim victory. But as Sarah watched the Vraxian commander bark orders at his troops, she noticed something that made her pause. Several cubs had gathered at observation windows throughout the station, all of them watching the preparations with the same expression she had seen the night before. Not excitement at seeing their parents prepare for battle, but something that looked disturbingly like grief. It was the look of children watching loved ones march towards certain doom. The descent into Arcturus VII's mining tunnels began as a routine operation, but Sarah quickly realized that nothing about this mission would prove routine. The elevator that carried them down through layers of rock and artificial supports seemed to descend forever, and with each level, the readings on their instruments became more erratic. Energy signatures are off the charts, reported Corporal James Kim, their sensor specialist. It's like something huge is generating power down there, but the patterns don't match any known technology. As they reached the deepest operational level, nearly 3 miles beneath the surface, the tunnel walls changed from smooth, artificial surfaces to rough natural stone that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. The air itself felt different here, thick with an energy that made their equipment hum and their skin tingle with unpleasant sensations. This is wrong, Lieutenant Webb whispered. Everything about this place feels wrong. Sarah couldn't disagree. In her years of military service, she had learned to trust her instincts, and every instinct she possessed was screaming warnings. But they had a job to do, and turning back now would only confirm Vraxian prejudices about human weakness. The tunnel system spread out before them like the arteries of some vast organism, branching and reconnecting in patterns that seemed almost deliberately confusing. Their maps, incomplete to begin with, proved nearly useless as they encountered passages that didn't appear on any official survey. Commander Zektar, Sarah called over the comm system. Are you seeing these unmapped tunnels? The Vraxian's response crackled with static. Minor survey errors, nothing more. Continue your reconnaissance. My warriors grow impatient for real action. But Sarah knew the difference between survey errors and something else entirely. These tunnels hadn't been missed by surveyors. They hadn't existed when the original maps were made. Something had been carving new passages through solid rock, and recently, as they moved deeper into the tunnel system, Following energy readings that grew stronger with each step, Sarah began to understand why 3 Vraxian teams had vanished without trace. This wasn't a place where normal rules applied. Physics itself seemed negotiable here, and the darkness beyond their lights felt actively hostile. The first sign of real trouble came when their sensors detected movement in the rock walls themselves. Not surface vibrations or structural settling, but something large shifting position within what should have been solid stone. When they stopped to investigate, touching scanning equipment to the tunnel walls, the readings suggested vast hollow spaces where their maps showed nothing but mineral deposits. "Captain," Sergeant Park called from the rear of their formation. "We're being followed." Sarah turned to look back the way they had come, but saw only empty tunnel stretching into darkness. "Are you sure?" "No visual contact, but something's tracking our movement. Staying just beyond sensor range, but it's there." The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. The missing Vraxian teams hadn't been killed by environmental hazards or equipment failures. They had been hunted, and now whatever lived in these tunnels had found new prey. The tunnel walls seemed to breathe around them as Sarah's team moved deeper into the mining complex. Their helmet lights carved narrow paths through darkness that felt almost alive, and every footstep echoed strangely, as if the sound was being absorbed and analyzed by something vast and patient. "Energy readings are spiking," Corporal Kim reported, his voice tight with strain. "Whatever's down here, it's getting stronger." Sarah checked her chronometer. They had been underground for 2 hours, following a trail of anomalous readings that led consistently deeper into areas that shouldn't exist according to official surveys. The tunnel system had become a maze of natural caverns connected by passages that looked carved rather than blasted, their walls smooth and curved in ways that suggested organic rather than mechanical excavation. "Zektar, do you copy?" Sarah tried the comm again, but received only static in response. "We're getting interference down here. Comms are spotty at best." Lieutenant Webb examined one of the carved passages with growing unease. "Captain, look at these wall markings. They're not random. There's a pattern here like some kind of language or navigation system." Sarah studied the strange symbols etched into the stone. They seemed to shift and flow in her peripheral vision, almost as if they were moving when she wasn't looking directly at them. "Document everything. I want detailed scans of these markings." But as Kim began setting up his scanning equipment, a new sound reached them from the depths ahead. It started as a low rumble, barely perceptible through the rock, but gradually grew into something that made their bones ache and their equipment malfunction. The sound wasn't mechanical or geological. It was organic, alive, and unmistakably hostile. "We need to go back," Sergeant Park said, her usual calm cracking slightly. "Right now, Captain. Whatever made that sound, we don't want to meet it." Sarah was inclined to agree, but before they could begin their retreat, the tunnel behind them filled with new sounds. Heavy footsteps, mechanical whirring, and the distinctive hum of Vraxian plasma weapons. Zektar and his warriors were descending into the depths, apparently tired of waiting for the human reconnaissance to finish. "Stubborn idiots," Webb muttered. "They're going to get everyone killed." Through the comm static, they could hear fragments of Vraxian battle communications. Orders barked in their harsh native language, followed by energy weapon discharge and what sounded disturbingly like screams. The sounds echoed through the tunnel system, amplified and distorted until it was impossible to determine direction or distance. "We have to warn them," Sarah decided. "Whatever's down here, they're walking into it blind." But as they tried to retrace their steps, the team discovered something that chilled them to the bone. The tunnel they had followed for the past hour was gone. Where there should have been a clear passage back to the main mining level, they found only solid rock, as if the path had never existed. "That's impossible," Kim said, running his scanners over the wall. "We just came this way. I have detailed recordings of every step." Sarah checked her own equipment logs. The data confirmed Kim's readings. They had definitely traveled through a passage that was now completely blocked. But the rock showed no signs of recent disturbance, no tool marks or blast residue. It was as if the stone had simply flowed together like water, sealing their escape route. "We're trapped," Park stated flatly. "Whatever's playing games with us, it wants us to go deeper." The organic rumble returned, closer now, and accompanied by other sounds that defied easy description. Scraping noises that might have been claws on stone, rhythmic pulsing that could have been breathing, and underneath it all, a subsonic vibration that made their teeth ache. "Forward is the only option," Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Stay alert, watch each other's backs, and document everything. If we don't make it out, at least the data might warn others." They proceeded through passages that grew increasingly strange as they descended. The artificial lighting installed by Vraxia miners had been replaced by a phosphorescent glow that emanated from the walls themselves, casting everything in an eerie blue-green light that made shadows dance and shift without apparent cause. The carved symbols became more frequent and complex, covering entire wall surfaces in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Some seemed to be maps or diagrams. Others resembled star charts of constellations that didn't match any known stellar formations. And scattered throughout were images that looked disturbingly like various galactic species, including humans, but rendered in ways that suggested they were being studied rather than celebrated. "Captain," Webb called softly, "I think we found one of the missing survey teams." In a side passage, barely visible in the phosphorescent glow, they discovered what remained of a Vraxian exploration squad. The warriors' powered armor lay scattered across the cavern floor, but there were no bodies inside. The equipment had been carefully disassembled, each component sorted and arranged with methodical precision that suggested scientific analysis rather than random destruction. "No weapons discharge," Park observed, examining the scene. "No signs of struggle." They were taken apart while they watched. Kim's scanners detected trace biological material, but the readings made no sense. "I'm getting Vraxian DNA signatures, but they're scattered throughout the rock itself, like they were somehow integrated into the stone structure." Before anyone could respond to this disturbing revelation, the comm system crackled to life with a transmission from somewhere in the tunnel system ahead. Zektar's voice, distorted but recognizable, cut through the static. "All units, converge on Sector 7. We have contact with hostile entities. Repeat, we have contact." The transmission was followed by the distinctive sound of plasma weapons firing in rapid succession, energy discharges that lit up their position indicators like a fireworks display. But the weapon's fire lasted only moments before cutting off abruptly, leaving only silence. "We have to help them," Sarah said, though every instinct screamed against moving toward the sounds of battle. As they navigated through increasingly bizarre passages toward Zektar's last known position, the team encountered evidence that the tunnels were actively changing around them. Passages split and merged without warning, ceiling heights fluctuated wildly, and several times they found themselves walking on surfaces that had definitely been walls just moments before. "The whole place is alive," Kim whispered. "The mineral matrix is some kind of adaptive organism, maybe silicon-based life that can restructure itself at will." "That would explain the missing survey teams," Webb added grimly. "They weren't killed, they were absorbed, studied, cataloged." Sarah tried not to think about the implications. If Kim was right, they weren't exploring mining tunnels anymore. They were inside something vast and alien that had been masquerading as a planet's geological structure, something that had been patiently allowing the Vraxians to extract resources while it learned about them, preparing for something larger. The phosphorescent glow ahead grew brighter as they approached what appeared to be a vast cavern. The space was enormous, easily large enough to hold the entire mining station, and its walls were covered in formations that looked more like neural networks than natural crystal growth. Bioluminescent veins pulsed with rhythmic light patterns that resembled brain activity, and the air hummed with energy that made their equipment malfunction. In the center of this organic cathedral, they found Commander Zektar and what remained of his assault force. The Vraxian commander was still alive, barely, trapped within some kind of crystalline matrix that held him upright while allowing limited movement. Around him, his warriors were similarly imprisoned, their powerful bodies held in structures that looked grown rather than built. Most were unconscious, but their vital signs registered on Sarah's scanners. "Zektar," Sarah called out as they approached the nearest crystal formation. The commander's 4 eyes opened slowly, focusing on the humans with difficulty. "Captain Shun, you should not have come here. This place, it learns. It studies. We are specimens now. What happened to your assault?" Webb asked, scanning the crystalline prisons for structural weaknesses. "We found their source," Zektar replied weakly. "The entity that controls this place. It's not from this world, possibly not from this dimension. The tunnels, the entire mining operation, it's all been one vast experiment. We are the test subjects." Park was already setting charges around the crystal formations, but her explosives had little effect on the alien material. "It's absorbing the energy," she reported, converting explosive force into some kind of biological growth pattern. "The Cubs knew," Zektar continued, his voice growing weaker. "Children always sense these things first. They try to warn us with their songs about hungry darkness, but we didn't listen. We never listened to the young ones." Kim's sensors detected massive movement in the cavern walls around them. Whatever intelligence controlled this place had become aware of their presence and was responding accordingly. The neural networks pulsed faster, and new formations began emerging from the floor and ceiling. "We need to get you out of here," Sarah said, but Zektar shook his massive head. "Too late for that. But not too late for the Cubs. They're coming for the station next. The entity has learned enough about us to begin the real harvest." The cavern floor began to shift beneath their feet, and Sarah realized they had seconds before becoming permanent additions to the alien collection. "Everyone out now." But as they ran for the passage they had entered through, they discovered it had sealed itself shut. Every escape route was closing, crystal formations growing with impossible speed to block their retreat. In moments, they would be trapped like the Vraxians, held in stasis while something inhuman studied their biological and technological capabilities. There, Webb pointed to a narrow fissure high in the cavern wall. Natural formation, not part of the entity's controlled structure. Sarah didn't hesitate. "Move! Climb! Now!" They scrambled up the irregular wall surface, using their suits' magnetic anchors to gain purchase on the phosphorescent stone. Behind them, the cavern floor erupted with new growths, reaching toward them with appendages that looked disturbingly like grasping fingers. The fissure was barely wide enough for a human body, but it led upward through natural rock that seemed unaffected by the alien intelligence. As they climbed through the narrow space, their helmet lights revealed something that made Sarah's heart race with new hope. They were ascending through layers of normal planetary geology, moving away from the infected zone and toward the surface. The alien entity's influence apparently had limits, and they had found the boundary. But even as relief flooded through her system, Sarah knew their real problems were just beginning. They had to reach the mining station before the entity decided to expand its collection process to include Vraxian cubs and any other species that might prove interesting to study. The fissure eventually opened into a natural cavern system that connected to maintenance tunnels serving the upper mining levels. Their comm systems began working again as they climbed, and immediately started receiving emergency transmissions from the mining station. "All personnel to emergency stations," came the automated message. "Seismic activity detected in lower levels. Structural integrity compromised. Prepare for possible evacuation." Sarah tried to contact the station directly, but got only static in response. Either their communications were still being jammed, or something had happened to the station's transmitters. Neither possibility was encouraging. As they finally reached familiar mining tunnels and began the long journey back to the surface, Sarah found herself thinking about the Vraxian cubs who had tried to warn them. Children who sang about hungry darkness and broken light, who saw dangers that adults rationalized away. If Zektar was right about the entity coming for the station next, those cubs would be among the first targets. The alien intelligence had spent years studying adult Vraxians, but young minds would provide new data, fresh perspectives on the species' development and potential. "We have to get everyone off that station," Sarah said as they ran through the tunnels. "The entire mining operation is compromised. Will they listen to us?" Park asked. "Vraxians aren't known for taking advice from humans." Sarah thought about the cubs who had approached them despite their parents' warnings, young minds brave enough to reach out to strangers when their own adults wouldn't listen. Maybe children could teach them all something about courage when it really mattered. "They'll listen," she said with grim determination. "Because this time, we're going to make sure the children get to speak first." The mining station's lights appeared ahead like beacons in the darkness, but Sarah noticed immediately that something was wrong. Several sections showed no illumination at all, and the normally constant vibration of drilling equipment had stopped. The station felt dead or dying. They were almost out of time. The emergency elevator that carried Sarah's team to the surface felt like a coffin rising from hell. As they ascended through levels of mining equipment and storage bays, Their suit sensors detected increasing instability in the station's foundation structure. Whatever was happening in the depths below, it was affecting the entire facility. Station control, this is Captain Chun, Sarah transmitted as soon as they reached communication range. We have an emergency situation. The mining operation needs immediate evacuation. The response came from Chief Engineer Thorek, his voice strained with barely controlled panic. Captain Chun, thank the void you're alive. We lost contact with Commander Zektar's assault force 6 hours ago. The lower levels are showing massive structural changes, and we're detecting energy readings that our equipment can't classify. Where are the station's civilians? Sarah asked as the elevator finally reached the main operational level, sealed in the upper residential areas. Standard emergency protocol when we lose contact with survey teams. But, Captain, the children are asking for you specifically. The Cubs have been saying strange things, claiming they need to speak with the soft warriors about the deep songs. Sarah exchanged glances with her team. If the Vraxian Young had information that could help evacuate the station, they needed to hear it immediately. We're coming up. Keep everyone sealed in until we arrive. The mining station's corridors felt different as they made their way toward the residential levels. Emergency lighting cast red shadows on the walls, and the normal bustle of Vraxian workers have been replaced by an ominous quiet. But more disturbing were the subtle changes in the station's structure itself. Walls that should have been straight showed slight curves, and several passages seemed narrower than they had been just hours before. The infection is spreading upward, Lieutenant Webb observed, running his scanners over the affected areas. Whatever that entity is, it's starting to reshape the entire station. The residential level was a maze of family quarters designed to accommodate Vraxian social structures, with central gathering areas where extended clans could meet and children could play safely while their parents worked. Sarah found the area packed with nervous families, adults clustered in defensive groups while their cubs huddled together in smaller formations. Chief Engineer Thorek met them at the security checkpoint, his scaled features showing the stress of command during a crisis. The situation is deteriorating rapidly. We've lost all contact with the lower mining levels, and structural integrity is failing throughout the middle sections. But the Cubs insist they have information that could help. Then, let's hear what they have to say, Sarah replied. The young Vraxians were gathered in the central play area, their golden eyes bright with urgency as they watched the human soldiers approach. The Cub Sarah had spoken with the night before stepped forward, apparently designated as spokesman for the group. The deep songs are rising, soft warrior, the young one said, its voice carrying surprising authority despite its size. The hungry dark has learned enough from the adults. Now it comes for us, for the little ones who hear different frequencies. Sarah crouched down to the Cub's eye level. Tell me about these songs. What do you hear that the adults don't? The sleeping crystal sings when it dreams. Another Cub explained, joining the first. But something woke it too early before its song was finished. Now it's angry and confused, trying to remember what it was supposed to become. A third Cub, barely old enough to walk, tottered forward with something clutched in its small hands. The object looked like a piece of standard mining equipment, but it had been modified in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Crystalline growths had been integrated into the metallic structure, creating a hybrid device that pulsed with bioluminescent light. The deep singers left this for you, the tiny Cub said, offering the strange object to Sarah. They say the soft warriors might understand what the hard warriors cannot. Sarah accepted the device carefully, noting that it felt warm to the touch and seemed to vibrate with its own internal energy. Kim immediately began scanning it with his instruments, but the readings defied classification. It's some kind of communication device, he reported. But the technology is unlike anything in our databases. It appears to be part organic, part artificial, and part something else entirely. The sleeping crystal wants to go home, the first Cub explained. But it's lost, and the angry songs from below keep making it more confused. The deep singers say only those who understand soft strength can help it remember the way. Lieutenant Webb frowned at the cryptic explanation. What do they mean by soft strength? The Cubs exchanged glances before the spokesman answered. Hard warriors break things that resist them. Soft warriors bend things that cannot be broken. The sleeping crystal is not something that can be broken, only bent. Before Sarah could ask for clarification, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights flashed in patterns that indicated massive structural failure, and the deck beneath their feet started to vibrate with increasing intensity. Chief Thorek's voice came over the station-wide communication system. All personnel prepare for immediate evacuation. The lower levels are collapsing, and the effect is spreading upward. We have perhaps 30 minutes before the entire station becomes uninhabitable. Through the residential area's observation windows, Sarah could see the mining equipment on the surface beginning to malfunction. Massive excavators suddenly changed direction, their digging arms moving in patterns that seemed almost ritualistic rather than functional. Conveyor systems that had operated smoothly for years began processing material that didn't appear on any sensor scans. The entity is taking direct control of the mining operation, Park observed. It's using the equipment for its own purposes now. The hybrid device in Sarah's hands pulsed brighter, and suddenly she could hear something that hadn't been there before. A low, melodious sound that seemed to come from the crystalline components, a song without words that conveyed meaning directly to her mind. Images flooded her consciousness. Vast spaces between stars where crystalline entities drifted in hibernation cycles that lasted millions of years. A young member of that species, barely formed and still learning to navigate dimensional boundaries, accidentally pulled through a quantum fissure by Vraxian mining operations. The creature's panic and confusion as it found itself trapped in solid matter. Its desperate attempts to return home interfering with local reality as it struggled with unfamiliar physics. "It's not malevolent," Sarah whispered, understanding finally dawning. "It's just lost and scared." The mining operation disrupted some kind of dimensional hibernation cycle, and now it can't find its way back to wherever it came from. The cubs nodded solemnly. The deep singers know this. That's why they made the bridge device. But it needs soft warrior strength to work properly. "What do you mean?" Webb asked. "Hard warriors would try to force the sleeping crystal to return home," the spokesman explained. "But force makes it more afraid, more confused. Soft warriors understand that sometimes you have to show something the way instead of pushing it." The station shuddered as another level collapsed below them. Through the communication system, they could hear evacuation procedures beginning as transport ships prepared to remove essential personnel. But Sarah realized that evacuation wouldn't solve the real problem. The entity would still be trapped, still be confused and frightened. Eventually, it would affect other mining operations, other worlds, other species. "How do we help it find its way home?" she asked the cubs. "The bridge device needs to connect with the sleeping crystal's dream song," the young spokesperson explained. "But the connection must be made with understanding, not force. Someone has to sing the soft warrior song that shows the way without demanding obedience." Kim studied his scanner readings of the hybrid device. "I'm detecting quantum resonance frequencies that might be able to interface with whatever dimensional technology the entity uses. But the energy requirements would be enormous, and the person making the connection would be exposed to forces we don't understand." The implications were clear. Someone would have to go back down into the infected levels, establish direct contact with the entity, and somehow convince it to accept help instead of continuing its panic struggles. It was a mission that would likely be one way, with no guarantee of success. "I'll do it," Sarah said without hesitation. "Captain, no," Webb protested. "We don't know what those energies could do to human physiology. The risk is too great." "The risk of doing nothing is greater," Sarah replied, looking around at the assembled families who were preparing to abandon their homes. "If this entity spreads to other systems, millions of people could be affected. Someone has to try." But before anyone could argue further, the decision was taken out of their hands. The station's artificial gravity fluctuated wildly, and several walls began showing the same crystalline growths they had seen in the deep caverns. The entity's influence was spreading faster than anticipated, and they were running out of time. "All civilian personnel to evacuation ships immediately," Thorek announced. "Station structural integrity is failing on all levels." As families began moving toward the transport bays, the cubs surrounded Sarah with urgent whispers. "The sleeping crystal is dreaming about us now," the spokesman said. "It's trying to understand why the hard warriors wouldn't listen to the little ones. It thinks maybe the cubs know something important." "What does it want to know?" Sarah asked. "How to be small again," another cub replied. "How to be young and lost and still find someone who will help without being afraid." Sarah felt the weight of understanding settle on her shoulders. The entity wasn't just lost in space. It was lost in time, trapped in an adult form when it was still essentially a child. That was why it had been studying the various species young, trying to understand how children communicated with adults who wouldn't listen. It needs to learn how to ask for help, she realized. The hybrid device in her hands pulsed brighter, and the song in her mind grew stronger. But now she could hear something else beneath the melodic tones, the frightened crying of something very young and very far from home, calling out for someone, anyone, who might understand its need. As the evacuation continued around them, Sarah made her decision. She would go back into the depths, not as a warrior going into battle, but as someone responding to a child's cry for help. The entity might be vast and powerful beyond imagination, but at its core, it was just a lost young one who needed someone to listen. The cubs seemed to sense her resolve. They gathered closer, their small hands touching her armor in what appeared to be a blessing ritual. Sing the soft warrior song, the spokesman whispered. Show the sleeping crystal that someone finally hears its dream. As the first transport ships lifted off from the station's landing bays, Sarah prepared to descend once more into the depths. But this time, she wouldn't be going as a soldier investigating a threat. She would be going as someone answering a call for help from across the stars. The elevator doors closed behind her team as they began their descent toward a confrontation that would determine the fate of the entire sector. But for the first time since this crisis began, Sarah felt something approaching hope. Sometimes the strongest thing a warrior could do was listen to a frightened child's song and offer to help them find their way home. The depths were waiting, and so was something vast and ancient and desperately afraid. But fear could be transformed into trust if someone was brave enough to try. The descent into the corrupted mining levels felt different this time. Where before the tunnels had seemed hostile and alien, now Sarah could sense the desperate confusion that permeated every changed surface. The walls weren't trying to trap them. They were reaching out like a lost child grasping for any familiar contact. The hybrid device the cubs had given her pulsed steadily in her hands, its crystalline components resonating with frequencies that seemed to calm the worst of the structural instabilities. Passages that had been shifting and changing now held steady long enough for the team to navigate safely. The entity is responding to the device, Corporal Kim reported, monitoring the energy readings. It's almost like it recognizes the technology. The cubs said their people had contact with these beings before, Lieutenant Webb reminded them. Maybe this isn't the first time someone got lost. As they moved deeper into the infected zones, Sarah began to understand the full scope of what they were dealing with. The entity hadn't just been randomly reshaping the mining tunnels. It had been trying to recreate something. The crystalline formations followed patterns that resembled stellar arrangements, and the neural networks pulsing through the walls looked like maps of dimensional pathways. It's been trying to build a navigation system, she realized. Attempting to recreate the quantum structures, it needs to find its way home. The cavern where they had left Commander Zektar and his warriors appeared ahead, but it had changed dramatically in the hours since their escape. The crystalline prisons had grown into elaborate formations that resembled a mixture of art installation and scientific laboratory. The trapped Vraxians remained conscious within their transparent cells, but they no longer seemed distressed. Captain Chun, Zektar called out as they approached. The entity has been attempting to communicate with us. It's been showing us images, memories of its home realm. I think I understand now why the cubs could hear its songs. What do you mean? Sarah asked, studying the peaceful expressions on the imprisoned warriors' faces. It's young, Zektar explained. Despite its vast size and power, it's essentially an adolescent of its species. Young minds recognize each other across any barrier. That's why our cubs could sense its distress when we adults dismissed it as a simple threat. The hybrid device in Sarah's hands grew warmer, and the song in her mind became more complex. She could sense the entity's attention focusing on their small group, vast intelligence studying them with the intensity of a confused child trying to understand why help had finally arrived. It wants to communicate directly, Kim said, watching his instruments register energy spikes throughout the cavern. The quantum resonance patterns are building towards some kind of interface connection. Is it safe? Webb asked, though they all knew the question was academic. Safe or not, this was their best chance to help the entity return home before its continued presence destabilized the entire sector. Safety is relative when dealing with interdimensional beings, Sarah replied. But The Cubs trusted us with this device, and I trust them. Let's see what it wants to tell us. Sarah placed the hybrid device against the nearest crystalline formation and felt an immediate response. The song in her mind exploded into full symphony, harmonies, and melodies that conveyed meaning without requiring translation. Images flooded her consciousness. Vast spaces between galaxies where crystalline beings larger than planets drifted in slow migration patterns that spanned millions of years. She saw the entity's origin story, a young member of its species on its first dimensional journey, still learning to navigate the quantum pathways that allowed its kind to travel between realities. The mining operation's quantum crystal extraction had created a resonance cascade that pulled the young entity through dimensional barriers into a realm where its natural abilities caused unintended chaos. The entity had been trying to return home for months, but its every attempt to access dimensional pathways had been blocked by the quantum crystals being extracted from the planet. The mining operation was literally harvesting the materials it needed to escape, creating a feedback loop that trapped it more completely with each passing day. The quantum crystals, Sarah gasped, understanding flooding through her mind. They're not just valuable minerals. They're components of the entity's dimensional navigation system. We've been mining its ability to go home. The revelation hit the team like a physical blow. The Vraxian Empire's most profitable mining operation was essentially torturing a lost child by stealing pieces of the technology it needed to return to its family. No wonder it's been studying us, Webb said grimly. It's been trying to understand why we would deliberately prevent it from going home. Through the device, Sarah could sense the entity's growing excitement as it realized she finally understood its situation. The crystalline formations throughout the cavern began to glow brighter, and new structures emerged from the walls. But instead of the chaotic growth they had seen before, these formations were precise and purposeful. The entity was building something. It's creating a communication array, Kim reported, his instruments tracking the rapid construction. Using the quantum crystals already present in the mining equipment, combined with its own biological technology. The array took shape around them, a complex structure that resembled both a massive musical instrument and a telecommunications device. Crystalline resonators emerged from the floor in arrangements that followed mathematical principles Sarah didn't recognize, while bioluminescent conduits connected everything into a unified system. Captain, Zektar called from his crystal prison. The entity is requesting permission to establish full communication protocols. It wants to explain its situation directly, but it needs conscious consent from a representative of a local species. Sarah didn't hesitate. Permission granted. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The hybrid device in her hands became a conduit for direct mental contact with an intelligence vast beyond human comprehension, yet unmistakably young and frightened. The entity's thoughts flooded into her mind, not as words, but as pure meaning that bypassed language entirely. It showed her its species' civilization, beings of living crystal and energy who existed partially in normal space and partially in quantum dimensions that allowed faster-than-light travel without violating physics. They were ancient beyond measure, but also incredibly protective of their young, who were sent on dimensional journeys only when fully mature and accompanied by experienced guides. This entity was barely past the equivalent of childhood, sent on what should have been a routine training exercise through well-established dimensional pathways. But quantum mining operations throughout this galaxy had been disrupting those pathways for decades, creating instabilities that eventually pulled the young entity into a reality it wasn't equipped to navigate. It's been lost for subjective years, Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face as she shared the entity's memories of confusion and growing despair. Its family has been searching, but they can't locate it through the quantum interference our mining operations create. The entity's gratitude for finally being understood was so intense that Sarah had to break the connection temporarily to avoid being overwhelmed. When she reopened the link, she found that the being had modulated its communication to levels her human mind could safely handle. "Help me return the crystals to their proper configuration," the entity requested, its mental voice carrying the desperate hope of someone who had finally found a sympathetic listener. "The pathways home are still there, but I need specific quantum arrangements to access them." Kim was already studying the communication array, his instruments revealing the intricate ways the entity had begun reorganizing the available quantum crystals. It's not just randomly placing them. There's a precise mathematical relationship, like tuning forks that need to resonate at specific frequencies. But we don't have enough crystals, Webb observed. The mining operation has extracted and shipped most of the high-grade quantum material off-world. The entity's response carried profound sadness. I know. That is why I began reshaping local matter, trying to create synthetic substitutes. But my understanding of this dimensional physics is limited. I have been improvising. The casual way it described reshaping entire mining levels made Sarah's head spin. But she forced herself to focus on the solution rather than the scope of the being's power. What do you need from us? Help me gather the remaining crystals from throughout the mining complex. Then, help me understand how your species' technology interfaces with quantum matrices. My attempts to study your equipment have been imprecise. Sarah thought of the carefully disassembled Vraxian gear they had found, the way the entity had been methodically analyzing every piece of technology it encountered. From its perspective, it had been conducting careful research. From theirs, it had looked like the work of something predatory. We can do that, she said. But there's something else you need to understand. Our people are afraid of you. Your attempts to study us have seemed threatening to species that don't understand your true nature. The entity's confusion was palpable. I meant no harm. I was trying to learn how to communicate, how to ask for help without causing the fear responses I observe in adult specimens. The young one seemed more receptive to contact. Children often are, Sarah agreed. They haven't learned to be afraid of things they don't understand. But the adults need different approaches. Direct communication like this works better than trying to study us from a distance. Over the next several hours, Sarah and her team worked with the entity to locate and retrieve quantum crystals from throughout the mining complex. The being's ability to reshape matter proved invaluable, creating passages and tools that allowed access to previously unreachable deposits. More importantly, the entity learned to work collaboratively rather than simply taking what it needed. Commander Zektar and his warriors were released from their crystal prisons once the entity understood they would help rather than fight. The proud Vraxian commander struggled with accepting assistance from something he had been prepared to destroy, but even he could recognize the difference between a hostile invader and a lost child. The Cubs will be pleased, he admitted as they prepared the quantum crystal array for the entity's departure. They have been singing about helping the deep dreamer find its song of home for days. I thought it was simply children's imagination. Never dismiss what children tell you, Sarah replied. They see things we adults miss. The communication array reached completion as Arcturus VII's twin moons reached their zenith, casting silver light through the cavern's crystalline walls. The quantum crystals had been arranged in a complex three-dimensional pattern that resembled both a musical instrument and a spacecraft engine, pulsing with harmonics that made reality itself seem to vibrate. The pathway is stabilizing, the entity announced, its mental voice filled with joy and relief. I can sense the dimensional route home. My family's search songs are reaching through the quantum static. But as the entity prepared for departure, it paused, its attention turning once more to the humans who had helped it. Your species intrigues me, it said. Most galactic civilizations would have tried to capture or destroy what they didn't understand. You chose to listen instead. That is unusual. Sarah felt a complex mix of pride and sadness. Humans have a saying, it takes a village to raise a child. I think that applies to lost children of any species. The entity's gratitude was so profound that it manifested physically, crystalline formations throughout the cavern reshaping themselves into patterns of incredible beauty. But more than beauty, Sarah sensed something else, a promise. This will be remembered by my people, the entity said as dimensional energies began building around the quantum array. When next our kinds meet, it will be as friends who understand that sometimes the strongest thing any being can do is help a child find its way home. The activation of the dimensional pathway filled the cavern with light and music that existed on frequencies beyond normal perception. Reality twisted and folded as the entity accessed quantum pathways that allowed travel between dimensions. And, for a moment, Sarah glimpsed the vast spaces between stars where beings of living crystals sang songs that spanned galaxies. Then, the light faded, the music ended, and the cavern returned to normal rock and crystal formations. The entity was gone, returned to its own realm, and the family that had been searching for it across dimensional barriers. In the sudden silence, Sarah and her team stood among the remnants of the communication array, processing what they had just experienced. They had helped facilitate first contact between humanity and a species that existed on scales both vast and intimate, and they had done it not through warfare or diplomacy, but simply by listening to a frightened child's cry for help. Command is going to have some interesting debriefs to conduct, Webb said finally. Sarah smiled, thinking of the Vraxian cubs who will be thrilled to learn that the deep singer had finally found its song of home. I think we all have some interesting stories to tell. As they prepared to return to the surface, Sarah realized that this mission had changed more than just their understanding of mining operations or alien contact protocols. It had proven that sometimes the most advanced technology, the most powerful weapons, and the most sophisticated strategies were less important than the simple willingness to listen when someone needed help. The mining station would need to be rebuilt, the quantum crystal extraction operations redesigned to avoid disrupting dimensional pathways, and new protocols established for recognizing when geological anomalies might actually be signs of interdimensional visitors. But, most importantly, they had learned to listen to the children who sang about things adults couldn't hear. The journey to the surface felt like emerging from a dream into daylight, carrying memories of music that existed between dimensions and images of crystalline beings who traversed the spaces between galaxies. They had participated in something unprecedented in galactic history, a first contact scenario resolved not through conflict, but through compassion. As they reached the mining station's upper levels, Sarah could already hear the excited voices of Vraxian cubs who somehow knew their deep singer had found its way home. The young ones always knew these things first. It was time to make sure the adults started listening. 3 months after the dimensional entity returned home, Kepler Station had been transformed from a mining operation into something unprecedented in galactic history, a joint research facility dedicated to understanding interdimensional contact protocols and quantum pathway preservation. Sarah stood in the rebuilt observation deck, watching mixed crews of humans, Vraxians, and representatives from 12 other species work together to install new sensor arrays designed to detect dimensional disturbances before they became crisis situations. The mining operation continued, but under strict guidelines that preserved quantum crystal formations essential for interdimensional navigation. Captain Shun called Chief Engineer Thorek as he approached with a data tablet. The Galactic Council has approved our proposal for the interdimensional contact protocol. Your report was instrumental in convincing them that peaceful first contact is possible even with beings far beyond our normal understanding. Sarah accepted the tablet and reviewed the new protocols, noting with satisfaction that several key provisions have been based on observations made by the Vraxian cubs during the crisis. The document officially recognized that young individuals of various species often demonstrated enhanced sensitivity to interdimensional phenomena and should be consulted during any contact scenarios. The cubs will be pleased, she said. They've been asking when they can officially join the research teams. Through the observation deck's windows, she could see a group of Vraxian young ones playing in the station's expanded recreational area. But their games had changed since the entity's departure. Instead of traditional warrior competitions, they now engaged in collaborative exercises that involved listening to subtle environmental changes and interpreting complex harmonic patterns. The children had become informal consultants for the research teams, their natural ability to perceive interdimensional resonances proving invaluable for early warning systems. Several other species had begun sending their own young representatives to learn from the Vraxian cubs, creating an unprecedented interspecies educational program. Commander Zektar approached, his massive frame moving with less of the rigid military posture Sarah had initially associated with him. The crisis had changed the veteran warrior in ways that surprised everyone, himself included. The latest dimensional scans show stable quantum pathways throughout the sector, he reported. No signs of dimensional distress or lost entities. The new monitoring protocols are working effectively. Any word from the entity's people? Sarah asked. Zektar's mandibles clicked in what Sarah had learned was the Vraxian equivalent of a satisfied smile. 3 days ago, we received a communication through quantum resonance channels. The entity's family expressed formal gratitude for our assistance and provided navigational information to help us avoid disrupting their dimensional pathways in future mining operations. The communication had been more than a simple thank you message. The entity species had shared technological insights that revolutionized humanity's understanding of quantum physics, along with star charts showing safe zones for resource extraction that wouldn't interfere with interdimensional travel routes. It was a gift that would benefit the entire galactic community for generations. More importantly, Zektar continued. They've established regular communication protocols. If any member of their species becomes lost in our dimensional space, they now have ways to contact local civilizations for assistance rather than struggling alone. Sarah felt a deep satisfaction at that news. The entity's isolation and growing desperation had been the source of most of the crisis. Establishing communication methods meant future incidents could be resolved quickly and peacefully. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority message. Sarah activated the communication panel to find herself looking at Admiral Harrison of the Human Space Command, calling from Earth. Captain Shun, congratulations on your promotion to Commander. The Council has also approved your request to establish a permanent interdimensional contact division within the Joint Research Facility. Thank you, sir. We have several promising candidates for the new division, including some very insightful consultants. Admiral Harrison raised an eyebrow. I understand some of your consultants are quite young. The most effective ones, yes. We've learned that age and experience aren't always advantages when dealing with phenomena outside normal understanding. Sometimes fresh perspectives see solutions that established thinking misses. Through the communication link, Sarah could see other Human Space Command officers reviewing data behind the Admiral. The success of the Arcturus 7 mission had shifted military thinking throughout the galaxy. Instead of preparing for inevitable conflicts with unknown entities, various species were now developing peaceful contact protocols based on the human approach of listening first and fighting only as a last resort. Speaking of young perspectives, Admiral Harrison continued, we've received requests from several species to establish similar programs in their territories. The Altarians are particularly interested in training their young to recognize dimensional anomalies, and the Centauran Federation wants to know if human contact specialists will be willing to help develop their own peacekeeping protocols. Sarah glanced toward the recreational area where the Cubs were engaged in what looked like a complex game involving harmonic resonances and three-dimensional pattern recognition. What they called play was actually advanced training in interdimensional awareness, skills that might prove crucial for preventing future crises. I think we can arrange something, she said. But any training programs will need to include provisions for learning from local children as well as teaching them. We've discovered that young minds often perceive things that adult awareness filters out. After the communication ended, Sarah walked through the research facility's corridors, noting the changes that had transformed a simple mining station into a center of galactic cooperation. Laboratories where different species worked together on quantum physics problems, meeting rooms where diplomatic protocols were refined through actual contact with interdimensional beings, and training areas where young individuals from various worlds learned to interpret the subtle signs that indicated dimensional instabilities. But the most significant change was in the attitudes of the adults. Where before they had dismissed children's observations as imagination or wishful thinking, now they actively sought out young perspectives on complex problems. The Cub's ability to recognize the entity's distress had saved countless lives and possibly prevented a sector-wide crisis. In the Central Research Lab, she found Lieutenant Webb and Corporal Kim working with a mixed team of Vraxian engineers and Altarian physicists to refine the quantum resonance detection equipment. Their work had attracted attention from across the galaxy, as species after species realized that most of their haunted systems and cursed mining operations might actually be signs of dimensional visitors in need of assistance. How many requests for investigation are we up to now? Sarah asked. 47 confirmed dimensional anomalies requesting peaceful contact attempts, Webb reported. And that's just from the reports filed in the past month. Apparently, half the galaxy has been dealing with supernatural incidents that might actually be interdimensional contact attempts. Kim looked up from his quantum resonance calibrations. The most interesting cases are the ones where local children have been reporting strange songs or unusual dreams for years before the adults noticed any problems. It's like young minds are naturally sensitive to dimensional phenomena. Sarah nodded, thinking of similar patterns reported from across the galactic community. Children singing about deep music on worlds where mining operations later discovered dimensional instabilities. young individuals drawing pictures of crystalline beings on planets, where quantum anomalies have been dismissed as equipment malfunctions. Cubs and kits and hatchlings throughout the galaxy who have been trying to tell adults about interdimensional visitors for decades. We need to establish formal protocols for consulting with local children whenever we investigate dimensional phenomena, she decided. Their observations could be crucial for peaceful contact attempts. The soft sound of approaching footsteps made her turn to find a small group of Vraxian cubs entering the laboratory. The young ones had become regular visitors to the research areas, their insights often proving more valuable than sophisticated scientific instruments. Commander Chun, the familiar spokesman cub said in its carefully practiced standard, "We have received new deep songs. Another sleeping crystal is calling for help, but this one is different from the first." Sarah crouched down to the cub's level, noting the serious expression in its golden eyes. "Different how? This one is not lost like the deep dreamer was," another cub explained. "This one is trapped by something that will not let it go home, even when it asks correctly." The implications were disturbing. If another dimensional entity was being held against its will somewhere in the galaxy, the situation could escalate far beyond the crisis they had just resolved. An entity in genuine distress might not remain as patient and gentle as their young visitor had been. "Can you tell us where the songs are coming from?" Kim asked, already preparing his instruments to track any quantum resonance patterns the cubs might be detecting. The cubs exchanged glances before their spokesman answered. "Far away, where the cold stars sing of metal dreams and broken promises. The trapped crystal calls for soft warriors who understand the difference between taking and asking." Sarah felt a chill of recognition. The description sounded like the hegemony sectors, where automated mining operations stripped entire systems of resources without regard for local conditions or potential consequences. If one of those operations had captured a dimensional entity instead of just disrupting their pathways, the situation would require immediate intervention. "We need to investigate this," she said, standing and addressing her team. "If there's another entity in genuine distress, we can't wait for the situation to become a crisis." But as she began planning the investigation, Sarah realized something that filled her with profound hope rather than anxiety. 3 months ago, such a report would have triggered military mobilization and preparations for armed conflict with an unknown threat. Now, their first instinct was to organize a rescue mission for a lost child of an interdimensional species. The galaxy was learning to listen to its children, and in doing so, was discovering that most monsters were just frightened beings who needed help rather than violence. As the research teams prepared for their next mission, the Vraxian cubs gathered in their informal council area, comparing notes on the deep songs they continued to monitor throughout the galaxy. Their ability to detect dimensional disturbances had made them invaluable partners in maintaining peaceful contact with interdimensional visitors. But more than their practical skills, the cubs had taught the adults something far more important. That strength sometimes meant acknowledging what you didn't know and asking for help from those who saw things differently. The most powerful warriors in galactic history were learning humility from children who sang about things that existed beyond normal perception. Sarah stood in the observation deck as her team prepared for departure to investigate the new dimensional disturbance, watching the cubs who had started it all. They played their harmonic games with innocent joy, but their songs now carried the weight of galactic responsibility. They had become the early warning system for an entire sector, protecting both local civilizations and interdimensional visitors through the simple act of paying attention to sounds that adults couldn't hear. The human collapsed in battle had been her, Sarah realized. When traditional military thinking failed to resolve the crisis, she had fallen back on the most basic human instinct, protecting children and listening to what they were trying to tell her. That moment of abandoning her warrior training to embrace her caregiving instincts had been the key to everything that followed. But the eldest cub who rose to defend hadn't been her at all. It had been the Vraxian young ones who found the courage to approach strangers when their own adults wouldn't listen, who offered guidance when experienced warriors were lost, who sang about solutions that sophisticated technology couldn't detect. The children had been the real heroes of this story. The adults had just finally learned to listen. As their ship departed Kepler Station for the next interdimensional rescue mission, Sarah carried with her the most important lesson of her career. Sometimes the strongest thing a warrior could do was admit that a child might know something they didn't. Sometimes protecting others meant listening to voices that spoke too softly for adult ears to hear. Sometimes the greatest victories came not from conquest, but from the simple act of helping someone find their way home. In the depths of space, quantum pathways carried songs of gratitude from crystalline beings who had learned that not all species would try to capture or control what they didn't understand. And throughout the galaxy, children of dozens of species began learning to listen for the deep songs that might herald the arrival of lost travelers who needed guides rather than guards. The era of shoot-first contact protocols was ending, replaced by something unprecedented in galactic history. A civilization that had learned to approach the unknown with curiosity instead of fear, guided by the wisdom of children who sang about wonders that existed beyond the edges of adult imagination. The real war had indeed just begun, a war against isolation, fear, and the assumption that different meant dangerous. And in that war, the most powerful weapons were patience, understanding, and the willingness to learn from those who saw the universe with fresh eyes. The children would lead them through this war, one song at a time, until the galaxy finally learned to listen to the music that connected all living things across the vast spaces between the stars.